Have you ever wondered why some men can look at a woman, desire her, admire her, even build a life beside her, and yet deep down they are afraid of her, not afraid of her words or her strength or her independence in the modern sense, but of something older, quieter, far more dangerous to the illusions they live by. They fear the woman who sees them not through the eyes of approval, but through the eyes of truth, because that kind of woman cannot be possessed. She cannot be controlled, nor seduced by validation. She sees the projection for what it is, and in her gaze a man comes face to face with the thing he has spent his entire life running from, his own unconscious. Carl Jung wrote that every man carries within him an inner feminine, the anima, and that she is both the source of his inspiration and the mirror of his wounds. But when a real woman embodies that mirror in flesh, when she stands in her calm, radiant awareness, he feels an ancient tremor within his psyche. She awakens his longing, but also his fear. Because to love such a woman means to descend into himself, to see his shadows, to die to his false self. Most men are not ready for that. They crave the reflection that flatters, not the one that reveals. They want warmth, but not fire. And yet, the women who ignite that fear are the ones who carry the potential to transform him entirely. The paradox is brutal. What he fears most is also what he needs most. You can see it in the subtle way his demeanor changes around her. His jokes become a shield, his silence a defense, his admiration twisted with resistance, because in her stillness he feels exposed. Her composure, her refusal to chase, explain, or beg, awakens in him the terror of being seen beyond his masks. A woman, rooted in her own center, becomes a walking mirror to a man's fragmented soul. Her quiet confidence speaks the language of eternity. I am whole without you. And that sentence, unspoken yet undeniable, shatters the male ego more violently than rejection ever could. For the ego feeds on control, on being needed, on knowing it has power over another's emotions. But when a woman has mastered the alchemy of self-worth, his power evaporates in her presence. That is when fear takes root, not the kind born of physical danger, but the existential kind. The fear of dissolution, of irrelevance, of standing before something he cannot dominate. Her grace becomes his judgment. Her peace becomes his mirror. Many men confuse that fear with incompatibility. They'll say, she's too much, too intense, too distant. But the truth is, she is simply too real. And reality is something the unawakened masculine has not yet learned to face without armor. In the language of Jungian psychology, she embodies the completed anima, the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. She calls him toward his own depths, but to answer her call, he must let go of the superficial self that society rewards. He must confront his unhealed boyhood, wounds, the need for maternal validation, the craving to be admired, the terror of inadequacy. And that journey feels like death to a man whose identity depends on being seen as capable and in control. This is why he'll often test her boundaries, not out of malice but out of instinct. The masculine psyche, when faced with mystery, seeks to contain it. He'll pull away just to see if she'll follow, raise his voice to see if she'll shrink, withdraw his affection to see if she'll beg. And when she does none of those things, when she remains unmoved, anchored in her value, his shadow begins to tremble, because she represents something beyond pleasure or partnership. She represents truth, the kind of truth that burns illusions and exposes the places where a man has confused dominance with strength, attention with intimacy, desire with devotion. Some men rise to meet that truth. They take her presence as an initiation, a summons to grow. They stop projecting and start reflecting. They learn to hold her mystery without needing to solve it. These men are rare, but when they appear, the polarity between them becomes sacred. The woman, once feared, becomes the catalyst of his awakening. But for others, that awakening feels too threatening. They retreat into safer stories, safer women, safer lives, never realizing that what they ran from was not her, but their own depth. And yet she remains unshaken. For the woman who has done her shadow work no longer measures her worth by who chooses to stay. She has seen the trembling in men's eyes, the mixture of longing and terror, and she understands now. It was never personal. Her light simply revealed what they were not yet ready to confront. You can sense her presence like a shift in the atmosphere. Soft, yet commanding. Compassionate, yet impenetrable. She walks not to attract, but to remember. And in doing so, she activates the forgotten feminine in every man who crosses her path. To fear such a woman is to fear wholeness itself. Because she is not here to soothe the ego. She is here to awaken the soul. There is a particular silence that surrounds a woman who no longer seeks to prove her value. It's not arrogance nor detachment. It's the quiet hum of self-possession. A man can sense it the moment she enters the room. Her energy doesn't plead to be noticed. It commands attention without asking for it. And that, more than anything, unnerves him. For centuries, the masculine has been conditioned to associate power with control. To conquer, to define, to label. Yet, when faced with a woman who exists beyond definition, who cannot be reduced to a role, a fantasy, or a function, he finds himself disarmed. It is not that she denies him, it's that she doesn't orbit him. She moves by her own gravitational law. In Jungian language, she embodies the integrated feminine, the union of the light and dark, the nurturer and the destroyer, the muse and the mystic. Her wholeness makes her unpredictable. She can be soft without being submissive, sensual without being owned, kind without being naive. And to the man who has not met his own unconscious, this complexity feels like chaos. He cannot control what he does not understand, and he cannot understand what he has not yet become. That is the essence of his fear. Her presence evokes the parts of him he has rejected, the sensitivity he repressed, the vulnerability he buried, the emotions he deemed weak. She stirs his forgotten self, and that awakening threatens the fragile scaffolding of his ego. He will call her mysterious, yet what he truly means is that she is mirror-like. Her mystery is simply his reflection. Her unpredictability is his inability to read what exists beyond logic. For a man who lives from the mind alone, a woman who moves from soul is an enigma he cannot decipher. And so, many men retreat from such women under the guise of freedom. They'll say they need space, that she's too much, that they can't keep up. But beneath those words lies a deeper truth. She disrupts the hierarchy that has long made him feel safe. She does not submit to his rhythm. She moves to her own. This isn't rebellion. It's balance. For centuries, women were taught that love meant shrinking, softening, and smoothing the edges of their truth to fit the comfort of others. But the woman who has met her own shadow no longer performs that role. She knows the cost of being too agreeable, the quiet death of authenticity. She would rather be misunderstood than betray herself again, and that terrifies the unawakened masculine. Because for him, love has often meant possession. Connection has meant control. His identity, unexamined, depends on her compliance. Without it, he is forced to ask questions that unravel everything. Who am I when I am not being admired? Who am I if I am not needed? In that confrontation, his soul trembles, because somewhere inside, he remembers a time when love was pure, not transactional, not performative, not conditional. But to return to that love, he must confront his own brokenness. He must face the mother wound, the father wound, the childhood longing for safety that he tried to bury beneath ambition and conquest. The awakened woman, without even trying, invites him back to that place. Her patience is not the patience of submission, but of wisdom. She knows he is wrestling with ghosts older than her, but she also knows it is not her role to exorcise them for him. You see, this is what most men fear, but cannot articulate, that the love of a conscious woman demands accountability, not perfection. It asks for presence, not promises. It reveals every place where the masculine has mistaken dominance for strength and avoidance for peace. Her love does not flatter, it refines, it exposes, it resurrects. And that is terrifying to the man who has built his worth on the approval of the world. She becomes his initiation, not through confrontation, but through her unwavering authenticity. Her refusal to chase forces him to examine why he expected to be chased. Her silence after disrespect forces him to hear the echoes of his own immaturity. Her self-respect becomes a mirror to his lack of discipline. And yet, when he finally stops resisting, when he surrenders to that discomfort instead of fleeing from it, he begins to see that her power was never meant to dominate him. It was meant to awaken him. Her calmness was never indifference. It was invitation. Her distance was never rejection. It was space for him to rise. Because when a woman lives in alignment with her essence, she calls forth the true masculine. Not the boy seeking approval, but the man seeking purpose. She demands the death of the ego not as punishment, but as rebirth. But this death feels like fear before it feels like freedom. The man must first lose the illusion that he owns love before he can experience its truth. He must lose the fantasy of control before he can taste connection. He must lose his projection before he can see the person in front of him. And when that happens, something sacred emerges. The polarity is no longer a battle of wills, but a dance of consciousness. Her power no longer threatens him. It steadies him. Her independence no longer wounds him. It inspires him. And in her reflection, he finally sees himself, not the man he pretended to be, but the one he was always meant to become. To the untrained eye, this dynamic might look like tension, a push and pull between pride and vulnerability, strength and surrender. But beneath it lies a deeper alchemy, one that Carl Jung described as the sacred union of opposites. The conjunctio, he called it, the merging of masculine and feminine energies within the psyche. Yet, before that union can take place within a man, he must first encounter the woman who reflects it outwardly. And that encounter is never comfortable. She is not the soft dream he imagined, the easy tenderness that soothes his ego. She is the flame that exposes everything false. Her love is a mirror polished by pain, clarity, and years of introspection. When he looks into her, he does not merely see beauty. He sees the truth of what he has avoided, his impatience, his fear of intimacy, his hunger for validation disguised as confidence. Her depth intimidates him because it refuses to stay on the surface. She asks the questions his mind cannot answer. She listens to the pauses between his words, the tremor beneath his laughter, the subtle withdrawal of energy when he's lying to himself. In her presence, masks crumble, not because she tears them off, but because they simply cannot breathe in the oxygen of her authenticity. He feels it like a quiet unraveling. The parts of him that once commanded rooms now feel hollow. The pride that once defined him begins to ache under the weight of her stillness. He tries to impress her, but she smiles gently, as though she has seen this all before. Because she has. She has watched men mistake performance for presence. She has watched them crave admiration more than connection. She has learned to discern between attraction that flatters and attraction that transforms. And so she doesn't compete. She doesn't chase. And she doesn't bend herself to fit into the narrow frame of a man's comfort. She simply stands in the fullness of her being. That, in itself, is the revolution. Men who have not yet met themselves often confuse her detachment with coldness. But it is not coldness. It is sovereignty. It is the knowing that love given, Without self-respect becomes charity for the unhealed, and she no longer runs a shelter for those unwilling to confront their shadows. Her boundaries are not walls, but sacred gates. They open only to those who approach with reverence, who come not to consume her energy but to meet it. A man who crosses that threshold must first face the parts of himself that long to dominate or be rescued. In her world there is no hierarchy, only truth. And truth, to the fragile ego, is the most frightening force of all. You can see it in his eyes when he begins to realize what she represents. He is both drawn and repelled. His desire for her is primal, yet laced with dread, because deep down, he knows she will never belong to him in the way he's been taught women should. She may choose him, but she will never need him. Her love will never come from emptiness. It will come from overflow, and that changes everything. The feminine in her is not the passive receiver. It is the creative source. It is the void that gives birth to form. She doesn't need to prove her worth because she is the worth. She doesn't need to prove her value because her existence is already an act of value. And for the man who has built his confidence on external validation, that realization is devastating. He begins to see that true masculinity is not about dominance, but direction. Not about control, but consciousness. The more he tries to possess her, the more she slips through his grasp, not out of cruelty, but out of nature. You cannot own what exists beyond ownership. You can only meet it, honor it, rise to it. This is what men fear most, but cannot say, that the love of a truly awakened woman will force them to evolve or to flee. There is no middle ground. Her very existence challenges the comfort of mediocrity. She cannot dim her light to spare the eyes of those who refuse to see. And yet, when a man finally dares to face that fear, something miraculous begins to happen. The energy between them transforms from battle to harmony. He no longer feels threatened by her independence because he has found his own. He no longer mistakes her boundaries for rejection because he understands now that they are mirrors of his own integrity. In this state, the masculine and feminine no longer compete. They complement. He leads not by controlling, but by creating safety. She follows not by submission, but by trust. The polarity becomes sacred, electric, alive. But this balance can only emerge when both have faced their inner opposites, when the man has embraced his vulnerability and the woman has reclaimed her power. When both understand that love is not ownership, it is reflection, not escape, it is evolution. And so, what men truly fear in women is not their power, but their mirror. Because the moment a man gazes into the eyes of an awakened woman, he is staring into his own soul. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the man finally stops running from her reflection. It is the moment when the armor begins to crack, when the noise of competition fades, and what remains is the raw pulse of truth. The fear he once projected onto her now begins to reveal its real source. It was never about her power, her beauty, or her silence. It was about his own unintegrated self, the emotions he buried, the tenderness he ridiculed, the dependency he denied. In Jungian psychology, this confrontation marks the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. The woman, often, unknowingly, becomes the catalyst for this transformation. Through her depth, she awakens his own. Through her boundaries, she teaches him about integrity. Through her self-knowledge, she silently asks him to meet himself. But few men cross that threshold. Many stop at the edge, where the light of her awareness meets the darkness of their avoidance. That is where the ego fights hardest, because it senses its own death approaching. The ego knows that if he truly allows himself to be seen by her, everything false within him will collapse. The personas, the masks, the illusions of control, they cannot survive in her light. She doesn't have to say a word. Her presence alone disrupts the illusions he built his life upon. That is the essence of her danger. She threatens not his life, but his false self. And yet, paradoxically, she is also the doorway to his real one. For centuries, women were taught to soften this mirror, to make themselves smaller, gentler, easier to love. But the awakened feminine has remembered her sacred role, not to comfort, but to awaken, to love not through submission, but through truth, to be the living reminder that no man can rise if he continues to hide from himself. Her detachment, then, is not cruelty. It is compassion of the highest order. She knows that if she chases him, she will rob him of the very awakening his soul is crying for. She knows that love without growth becomes a prison, and so she steps back, not to punish, but to protect the integrity of both souls. He feels the loss of her like a cold wind against the bones of his pride. He may seek refuge in other women, in distraction, in work, but nothing feels the same. Because once a man has touched the energy of an integrated woman, all imitation feels empty. Her presence imprints something eternal in his psyche, a haunting, a memory of what truth feels like. He begins to see that her refusal to bend was not rejection, it was invitation. Her silence was not absence, it was space. She was never against him. She was for his becoming. But he could not see it until the noise of his ego quieted down. And this is the paradox that defines the sacred feminine. She both dismantles and resurrects. She destroys the boy who seeks validation, and in doing so, gives birth to the man capable of real love. The kind that does not fear her independence but admires it. The kind that does not demand her body to feel powerful but honors her mind to feel connected. To reach that point, however, he must walk through his own underworld, the loneliness, the confusion, the grief of shedding his old identity. Every man who truly meets such a woman faces this descent. It is his initiation into authentic masculinity. He learns that control is not strength, presence is, that dominance is not power, awareness is, that possession is not love, reverence is. And for the woman, there is a transformation too. Once she understands that men's fear of her power is not hatred but unconscious awe, she no longer takes it personally. She stops dimming herself for their comfort. She stops confusing rejection with unworthiness. She realizes that being misunderstood is often the price of living in truth. Her solitude no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like sovereignty. She learns that her light will attract two kinds of men, those who are awakened enough to rise beside her, and those who will try to pull her back into the darkness because they are not yet ready to face their own. She blesses them both and continues walking. This is the true meaning of the sacred feminine. She does not fight to be understood. She exists to be remembered. She carries within her the echo of every woman who was once silenced, every truth that was once feared, every power that was once buried. And the men who are ready will not run from her. They will rise to meet her. For when a man finally faces the fear she awakens in him, he realizes it was never her he feared. It was the depth of his own soul. And in that recognition, the battle ends. Because there is no war between the masculine and the feminine, only the illusion of separation. When fear dissolves, union begins. When control falls away, intimacy is born. And what remains is something quiet, vast, and holy. The kind of love that doesn't consume, it liberates. When he finally stops seeing her as the enemy and begins to see her as the mirror, something ancient awakens within him. The fear that once gripped his chest begins to melt, not because she has changed, but because he has begun to see. The fire that once frightened him now feels like warmth. The silence that once unnerved him now feels like home. He realizes that what he mistook for her power was not dominance at all. It was alignment, She wasn't trying to overpower him, she was simply refusing to abandon herself. And that, he learns, is the highest expression of love. Not sacrifice, but truth. In her reflection, he begins to remember what it means to be whole, to be a man who leads not from ego but from consciousness, to be present without control, strong without suppression, loving without fear of losing. The woman he once feared becomes his greatest teacher, not through words, but through her being. Her ability to hold her own space teaches him the meaning of respect. Her refusal to play the savior or the victim teaches him emotional responsibility. Her patience, neither indulgent nor desperate, teaches him balance. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the old paradigms collapse. He begins to realize that connection was never about filling a void. It was about witnessing another soul without trying to own it. That love was never about taming. It was about transforming. That the feminine is not meant to be conquered but cherished, not subdued but understood. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." This is the essence of the encounter between an awakened man and woman. Their union is not built on dependency but on reflection, each revealing the unconscious to the other, each calling forth what is dormant, each burning away the illusions that keep them small. This is why her presence feels dangerous at first. It burns away his old identity. But once he survives that fire, he discovers freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you no longer need to control love, because you have finally surrendered to its intelligence. And for her too, something shifts. She no longer views men through the lens of distrust or disappointment. She stops projecting her pain onto them and begins to see their struggle with compassion. She understands now that their fear of her power was never personal. It was a reflection of the collective wound between the masculine and feminine. The woman who once walked alone now walks in peace. Not because the world has changed, but because she no longer seeks its permission to exist fully. Her strength no longer feels like defiance. It feels like grace. Her independence no longer feels like armor. It feels like truth. She becomes magnetic in a way that transcends physicality. Her energy communicates something wordless. I am whole. And the men who are ready feel it, not as threat, but as invitation. They sense that to love her is to step into the unknown, to meet themselves through her. This is not romance, it is initiation. The feminine calls forth the awakening of the masculine, and the masculine, once awakened, becomes the protector of that very awakening. He no longer fears her light, he guards it. He no longer competes with her power, he channels his own to hold it. Together, they create something that has been missing in modern love, a harmony rooted not in dependence, but in consciousness. In that sacred balance, the man no longer seeks to impress. The woman no longer seeks to prove. There is nothing to win, nothing to hide, nothing to chase. There is only presence, the highest currency of love. She speaks, and he listens, not to respond, but to understand. He holds her, not to claim her, but to honor the privilege of her trust. And she, in return, allows herself to be vulnerable, not from fear of loss, but from the recognition of safety. The polarity between them becomes a living meditation. His groundedness becomes her freedom. Her intuition becomes his guide. His strength becomes her shelter. Her compassion becomes his mirror. Together, they learn that love was never meant to complete what was broken, but to celebrate what has been made whole. And yet, not every man will reach this point. Many will stop at the threshold of their own becoming, unable to walk through the fire of truth she represents. They will retreat into the safety of shallow connections, confusing comfort with peace, attachment with love. And that's all right. The awakened woman does not mourn what leaves. She blesses it, knowing that everyone awakens in their own time. She no longer wastes her power, convincing someone to see her light. She knows that the right man will not fear her fire. He will tend to it. He will not flee from her storm. He will anchor himself within it. He will not try to own her soul. He will stand beside it. Because the woman who has met herself does not seek validation. She embodies revelation. She has become what every man secretly longs for and fears in equal measure. The reminder that love is not about possession. It is about presence. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.